When we're writing about ourselves, the only sources we're referring to are internal, a jewel or two plucked from their velvet cases, or plucked with dexterity from the shallows of our oceans, a pearl moved by the moon and memory. However, when we want to write about topics that are unknown to us, on subjects we wish to explore, we must turn to external sources. Over the past few years, I've noticed a subtle decline in my ability to retain information while reading online. As such, I have returned repeatedly to physical media. Books, printed articles, magazines, zines, and more offer us opportunities to engage the text. What does engaging a text look like? For French critical theorist Roland Barthes, engaging with a text meant actively transforming oneself from a passive consumer of text to an active participant who questions, investigates, responds, and in some ways revises the text. If one thinks of writing as a mode of cognition, bringing ourselves into a deeper relationship with reading means bringing ourselves closer to the mode of thinking that the writer brings to the page, and our own. For Barthes, this means the reader engages the text in a writerly way, meaning that the one who reads gets to co-create the meaning of the text by engaging it deeply. This resonates with my approach, and in my owned books, you will often find underlines, container lines, holding paragraphs, and notes in the margin. My margin notes are in the moment thoughts in response to the author's thesis. I am a naturally argumentative person and enjoy the practice of contradiction purely for the possibility of revealing something new. So often my margin notes are pointed toward discovery. It is vital that when writing margin notes, you remain authentic. If you disagree with what an author says, disagree. If you agree, what is a complementary thought or experience you've had that highlights this attunement? Reading and rereading your sources. As mentioned before, we are in an era of dissolving memory. We read books, sometimes compulsively, and we come away having a general sense of having liked or disliked a book. Rarely do we recall distinct passages or turns of phrase. We are lucky to remember the general arc of an author's thesis. Generally speaking, my approach to reading and absorbing a text is to read it once for a general sense of the content. A second read goes much more slowly. Here, I am either making notes for the first time, especially if the first reading was a borrowed book, or taking my time with each sentence. I may even reread a sentence twice or break it down into smaller components to better acknowledge what the sentence is trying to accomplish. My third read is more or less a review, wherein I am going over the book's contours and my notes. Below is an example of how this rereading takes shape. First, I look for underlined sentences or passages that seem especially salient. Second, I type in my raw notes or refine them a bit. I get to ask the question about the text. What was I thinking here? Lastly, I compiled a neutral, just the facts, ma'am, summary. This final chapter summary provides me with the opportunity to demonstrate that I have understood the material presented. Later, this summary can become a foundational piece of a longer, more in-depth work of writing. An example of my notes organization. Mix of intuition and getting to work. Over the past few months, I've been working hard to determine what changes I need to make in my life to write more. I've worked with my husband to loosen up our meal planning so that we each have 2 days reserved for cooking full-on meals. The remaining days are open to grazing. This opens up my evenings and allows for breathing room to develop a writing schedule. I recognize that not everyone has this opportunity, and I'd be lying if I didn't acknowledge that sometimes I am bone tired after a day of creative ideation and thinking, as well as managing all manner of things. But writing is important to me, and if it or another creative act is important to you, you have to treat it and yourself with respect. Respect entails consistency and the belief that time is needed to craft something worthwhile, beautiful, and human. As outlined above, when I write about topics unrelated to personal memory, I am in research mode. Having a structure helps me make sense of what I'm absorbing. This requires a commitment to reading, notating, and discerning the most important parts of a source. I am a person who thrives on constraints, so having a ritual I follow helps launch me into more intuitive spaces. What does intuition look like in my writing process? Sometimes I awake with a full sentence or song in my head. In dreamland, some siren call has echoed through the canyons of my mind. A phrase, a miscalculation, will lead me towards a larger idea. Sometimes the haunting lilt of a song will take me down a road, allowing me to connect a personal thread with the subject I'm studying. More often than not, a single phrase will gestate and fling itself into my spirit, and I'll grab it by the tail and use that as my essay's opening line. For me, writing and making are much like David Lynch and Elizabeth Gilbert's theory on creativity, which suggests that one must become an open vessel where genius can flow through. One is not a genius, but rather one has a relationship with many geniuses that into consciousness at opportune times. Combining structure with this sort of spiritual and creative openness makes for a consistent practice. Editing is fun, actually. Openness remains at the top of the list of essential characteristics for serious writers and creators. When it comes to writing, one needs to be open to the possibility that the piece you're working on may change. I used to write full poems in one go with minimal editing along the way. I loved many of these poems, but looking back on that practice now, I realized there was a certain level of injustice for the poem and the reader. These poems were rough-hewn, as was I. A closer look at a piece of my writing is an act of due diligence, and by doing so, I am making my writing more discernible and distinct. I am making it sharper. My first draft is the rough spirit or geist of the idea. Editing moves the piece into a more solid, corporeal form. It is also a humbling experience, at once an acceptance of your wild and intuitive self, yet also the self that knows it is imperfect and could be improved. The editing mind is one that ultimately knows that your goal is to showcase your thinking and connect with others. This is not an exercise in vanity where we show off. It is also a conversation with others. Make your end of the conversation more coherent by editing your work. Tools to make editing easier. Read your writing out loud. Does a sentence snag? Are there too many words packed into one thought? You'll hear it if you read it out loud. Print your work on paper. This may seem old-fashioned, but just as when you're reading a published work and notice an error, this method will allow for the same. Make your first editing passes quickly and take breaks. If you're editing your work at the end of the day, or you're attempting to write and then edit, give yourself space between these actions. I think that writing and editing at the same time, outside of minimal line edits, are incompatible actions and spaces. Try to do them separately. Read your writing from the end to the beginning. Yes, work backwards. This tricks your brain into skipping over potential errors because you're reading linearly and expecting specific flows. As I mentioned earlier, writing and editing seem like two distinct tasks to me. I often edit while I write, but I think this only works in some instances and inhibits the natural flow of my thoughts. When I do a round of edits, my mind is primed to look for errors and inconsistencies rather than drinking my Kool-Aid. This sounds great. My final piece of advice is to ensure you enjoy the writing process. If you treat writing as an annoying little sister, that exhaustion will shine through. Enjoyment's definition has a lot of latitude for me. It doesn't always mean I'm blissed out and inspired. Intellectual friction is a form of fuel for me. So if you like being challenged and slipping into a state of flow, writing may be just the right spot for you. Writing is an exercise in resistance.